"Let's try this again, Mrs. Whitman," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You are here to speak on behalf of Airman First Class Davis. You claim to have served, to understand the unique pressures of military life. I have your paperwork here, and frankly it seems dated." Ruth Whitman stood perfectly still. Her hands, wrinkled and showing the faint cartography of age, were clasped loosely in front of her. Her posture, however, was a different story. It was a ramrod-straight defiance of the gravity that pulled at her skin, a silent testament to a lifetime of discipline. "My service record is accurate, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was low and even, without a tremor of anger or fear. It was a voice accustomed to being heard over the whine of turbines and the crackle of a headset. Judge Carmody chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. He shared a knowing look with the prosecuting attorney, a younger man who offered a tight, sycophantic smile in return. "I'm sure it is. A clerk, was it? A supply technician? Admirable work, of course. Everyone does their part." He gestured dismissively with a hand laden with a heavy gold ring. "But you're speaking to the character of a young woman facing serious charges, a woman who buckled under the pressure of the modern Air Force. I need to understand your frame of reference. Tell me, what was your call sign back in the day? Grandma? Bluebird?" The question hung in the stale courtroom air, thick with contempt. A few spectators tittered nervously. Airman Davis, a young woman barely 20 years old, hunched her shoulders, her face pale with shame. She had looked to Ruth as a lifeline, and now that line was being mocked, sawed through by the judge's casual cruelty. Ruth's eyes, a pale clear blue, met the judge's. They held no malice, only a profound ancient stillness. "No, Your Honor," she said, her voice unchanged. "It wasn't." The judge waved his hand again. "Fine, fine. Let's move on from the war stories." He picked up a sheaf of papers. Ruth submitted testimony. "You state here that you mentored young aviators on tactical decision-making, under extreme duress. That's a rather lofty claim for, let's see here." He squinted at her discharge papers. "A career that began when women were, shall we say, not exactly in the cockpit of a fighter jet." "I didn't fly fighter jets, Your Honor." "Ah, there we have it," Carmody said, slapping the papers down with an air of finality. "So you were ground support. A logistics officer, perhaps. I fail to see how that qualifies you as an expert on the psychological state of a modern combat controller." "I'm not a combat controller," Ruth replied evenly. "I worked with them." The judge was losing his patience. The woman's calm was more infuriating than any argument. It was as if his words, his authority, were pellets bouncing off invisible armor. He wanted her to be flustered, to be cowed. He wanted her to be the confused old woman her appearance suggested. "You worked with them," he repeated, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Doing what precisely? Serving them coffee? Filing their after-action reports? Mrs. Whitman, this is a veterans treatment court. We deal in facts and realities, not in faded memories of bake sales at the Officers' Wives Club." Across the courtroom, sitting near the side door, Bailiff Miller shifted his weight. A retired Air Force Master Sergeant, Miller had spent 25 years in security forces, from the deserts of Kuwait to the mountains of Afghanistan. He'd seen his share of colonels and generals, of blowhards and true leaders. He'd been watching the old woman, not with pity, but with a growing, nagging sense of recognition. It wasn't her face, it was her bearing. It was the way she stood, feet planted at shoulder width, a parade rest so ingrained it had become her natural state of repose. It was the way her eyes scanned the room, not darting, but assessing. He watched as Judge Carmody continued his assault. The judge demanded she produce her military ID. Ruth calmly retrieved a wallet from her handbag, extracted a retired military ID card, and handed it to the bailiff to pass up to the bench. Carmody held it up to the light as if it were a suspected forgery. "Colonel, retired," he read aloud, his eyebrows arching in mock surprise. "Well, I'll be. They must have been handing out birds to just about anyone back then." "What was your field, Colonel?" "Human resources. Public affairs." "Neither, Your Honor." The judge's face was beginning to flush a deep, mottled red. This quiet, gray-haired woman was making a fool of him through her sheer refusal to be dismissed. He felt his authority eroding with every calm, steady answer. He tossed the ID card back onto the bailiff's desk. "This court requires verifiable proof of relevant expertise. Your service, while I'm sure you are very proud of it, concluded years ago. The rules have changed. The technology has changed. The very nature of warfare has changed. You are an anachronism, Colonel, a relic. Your experience is, with all due respect, irrelevant." As he spoke, he gestured toward her, his hand sweeping dismissively in the direction of her blue tweed jacket. His eyes, for a brief moment, caught on something small and metallic pinned to her lapel. It was a pair of wings, But they were not the pristine, mirror-finished insignia one saw on dress uniforms. They were a dull, tarnished silver, the details softened by years of wear. They looked old, insignificant. "I'm sure those little wings were very meaningful at the time," he said with a final, cutting smirk. But for Ruth, the judge's words had faded into a low hum. His dismissive gesture at her wings had snagged on a thread of memory, pulling it loose. The stuffy wood-paneled courtroom dissolved. The air was no longer still and warm, but vibrating cold and thin. The scent of floor polish was replaced by the acrid tang of jet fuel and the metallic smell of ozone from the avionics. The gentle overhead lights became the hellish red glow of a combat cockpit at night, a light designed to preserve the pilot's night vision. Her hand wasn't clasped in front of her. It was wrapped around the collective of a 8H-60G Pavehawk helicopter, feeling the thrum of the twin-turbine engines through her bones. Below, the world wasn't a tiled floor, but a black, unforgiving expanse of Iraqi desert seen through the surreal green lens of her night vision goggles. A voice, young and tight with fear, crackled in her headset. Red River, this is Sandman 1. We're taking heavy fire from the South Ridge. We have 2 critical, repeat, 2 critical wounded. We need you now." The memory was less than a second long, a flash of sensory data, but it was more real than the man sitting on the bench in front of her. She blinked, and the courtroom swam back into focus. Bailiff Miller saw the shift in her eyes. It was a look he'd seen before in the eyes of old warriors, a sudden fleeting glimpse into the abyss of the past. He looked again at the name on the docket sheet he held. Whitman, Ruth, call Ray D. And then it clicked. Not just a name, but a story. A legend. A name he'd heard whispered in chow halls and NCO clubs from grizzled pararescuemen and flight engineers. Stories of a pilot from the old days, one of the first women to fly rescue missions deep behind enemy lines. A pilot with a reputation for impossible calm and even more impossible flying. The judge was now leaning back, looking satisfied. He had in his mind thoroughly dismantled her credibility. "Unless you have anything else to add that is remotely relevant to this century, Colonel Whitman, I suggest you return to your seat. Your testimony is stricken." Airman Davis buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She was lost. Bailiff Miller stood. He felt a cold knot of fury in his stomach. He'd stood by and watched generals get reamed out by congressmen and never batted an eye. It was part of the system, but this was different. This wasn't the system. This was desecration. Without a word, he walked to the heavy courtroom door, stepped into the hallway, and pulled out his cell phone. His thumb moved with practiced speed over the screen. He knew exactly who to call. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Command post. I need to speak to Colonel Rostova," Miller said, his voice low and urgent. "This is retired Master Sergeant Miller. Tell her it's a guardian angel matter." There was a pause, then a click. A new voice came on the line, sharp and professional. "This is Colonel Rostova. Ma'am, it's Dan Miller. I was a shirt for the 38th RQS back at Moody when you were a captain. I'm a bailiff over at the county courthouse now. I remember you, Master Sergeant," Colonel Eva Rostova said, her voice warming slightly. "What can I do for you?" "Ma'am, you're not going to believe who Judge Alistair Carmody is dressing down in open court right now," Miller said, the words spilling out. "He's holding a session of the Veterans Court, and he's treating her like a senile old woman who's wandered in off the street." "Treating who, Sergeant?" Miller took a deep breath. "Colonel Ruth Whitman, ma'am." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, a void of stunned comprehension. "Yes, ma'am," Miller continued, his voice barely a whisper. "That Colonel Whitman. The judge just asked her for her call sign as a joke." He paused. He's about to find out it was Red River. Inside Colonel Rostova's office at Creech Air Force Base, the world seemed to shrink to the size of her phone. Red River. It wasn't just a call sign. It was a foundational myth. It was the name they taught young CROs and PJs about in their history blocks. It was the standard against which generations of combat rescue aviators had measured themselves. She muted the phone for a second. "Chief," she yelled, her voice a whip crack that cut through the normal administrative hum of the headquarters building. Her command chief, Master Sergeant, a man with a chest full of medals and a face carved from granite, appeared in her doorway in seconds. "Ma'am, get the command car, now, and get the base honor guard, service dress. We're going to the county courthouse." She was already typing furiously on her keyboard, her security clearance granting her access to the military's deep archives. Colonel Ruth Whitman's file appeared on the screen, a cascade of commendations and classified mission reports that scrolled for pages. Distinguished Flying Cross with 1 oak leaf cluster, Air Medal with Valor device and 8 clusters, Meritorious Service Medal, a combat patch from the 1st Rescue Group from Desert Storm. Deployment records to Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Somalia. A note from a 3-star general. Colonel Whitman is the single finest instrument of calm I have ever witnessed in the crucible of combat. Where she flies, people live. The chief's eyes widened as he saw the name on the screen. He didn't even need an explanation. He just nodded sharply. On it, ma'am. Colonel Rostova unmuted the phone. Sergeant Miller, are you still there? Yes, ma'am. Keep that courtroom door open. We're 5 minutes out. Back in the courtroom, Judge Carmody was preparing to deliver his final, crushing blow. He savored the moment, the absolute power he wielded within these 4 walls. He looked down at Ruth Whitman, who had remained standing, a silent, blue-clad statue of defiance. Colonel Whitman, he began, drawing out the title with mock reverence. Given your apparent confusion and the unreliability of your testimony, I am forced to consider more serious measures. Falsifying your qualifications before a court of law is a grave offense. Stolen valor, while perhaps not legally applicable here, is a concept this court takes very seriously. It is an insult to every man and woman who has served with honor. He let that sink in. I am ordering a full review of your service record by the Department of Defense. If I find so much as a single discrepancy, I will not hesitate to recommend charges of perjury. Do you understand me? It was the ultimate overreach, the final arrogant step past the point of no return. He wasn't just dismissing her, he was threatening to erase her. It was then that the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. They didn't creak, they opened with a solid, authoritative thud that commanded the attention of every person in the room. Framed in the doorway stood Colonel Eva Rostova, immaculate in her Air Force service dress uniform, her silver command pilot wings gleaming above a formidable array of ribbons. Flanking her was her command chief, his uniform equally sharp, his presence radiating an NCO's unshakable authority. Behind them, 2 airmen from the base honor guard stood at a perfect, rigid parade rest. The sight was so unexpected, so jarringly official, that a wave of silence washed over the courtroom. All proceedings stopped. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. Judge Carmody stared, his mouth slightly agape. What is the meaning of this interruption? He demanded, his voice thin and reedy. This is a court of law. Colonel Rostova ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on only one person. She walked down the center aisle, her polished black shoes making sharp, rhythmic clicks on the linoleum floor. The sound was like a metronome counting down the final seconds of Judge Carmody's authority. She walked past the defense table, past the prosecution, and stopped directly in front of Ruth Whitman. She didn't speak. She simply drew herself up to her full height, her back ramrod straight, and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of her career. Her hand sliced through the air, stopping with a crisp snap at the edge of her eyebrow. Her gaze locked on the older woman in the tweed jacket. Colonel Whitman, ma'am, Rostova said, her voice ringing with a respect so deep it was nearly reverent. Colonel Eva Rostova, Commander, 432nd Wing. I apologize for our tardiness. Ruth Whitman looked at the younger colonel, a woman who represented the generation of female warriors she had helped make possible. A faint, sad smile touched her lips, and she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Rostova held the salute for a long moment before dropping her hand. She then turned to face the bench, her expression now a mask of cold, professional fury. Your Honor, she began, her voice devoid of any deference, you questioned this officer's qualifications. Allow me to clarify them for the record. She took a breath. Colonel Ruth Whitman was one of the first women selected for the combat rescue pilot training pipeline in the late 1980s. During Operation Desert Storm, while flying an HH-60G Pavehawk under the call sign Red River, she flew 18 combat sorties into active enemy territory. On one of those missions, she and her crew rescued a downed F-16 pilot less than 5 miles from an Iraqi Republican Guard division while under sustained anti-aircraft fire. For that action, she was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The veterans in the gallery were sitting bolt upright now, their eyes wide with disbelief. They were in the presence of a ghost, a legend. Rostova wasn't finished. In Somalia, she evacuated 14 wounded Army Rangers from a hot landing zone in Mogadishu. In Bosnia, she pioneered high-altitude rescue techniques that are still in the official curriculum at Kirtland. After 9/11s, despite being of an age where she could have comfortably retired, she volunteered for deployment. In Afghanistan, she flew medevac missions for years, frequently flying into mountain outposts that were under direct enemy attack. The tarnished wings on her jacket, Your Honor, are not a keepsake. They are the same wings she wore when she pulled a team of Green Berets off a mountainside in the Hindu Kush while the tail rotor of her aircraft was taking small arms fire. She has logged over 4,000 hours of flight time, more than half of it in combat or imminent danger zones. She hasn't just mentored young aviators, she has trained, led, and rescued generations of them. The reason airmen like the one sitting at that table can even dream of serving in combat roles is because Colonel Whitman kicked the door down and held it open for them. Rostova's voice dropped, becoming quiet but somehow more menacing. She doesn't just have relevant experience, Your Honor. For many of the people in this room who have served, Colonel Whitman is the experience. To question her honor in this chamber is an offense of the highest order. It is an insult not just to her but to every service member she has ever saved, trained, or inspired. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Carmody's face had cycled from red to a pasty, sickly white. He looked at Ruth Whitman, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not an old woman but the shadow of the warrior she was. He saw the steel beneath the soft tweed, the fire banked behind the pale blue eyes. He cleared his throat, a small pathetic sound. "Colonel Whitman," he stammered, Perhaps I was hasty. The court would be honored to hear your wisdom on this matter." Ruth took a step forward. She didn't look at the judge. Her eyes were on Airman Davis, who was now staring at her with an expression of pure awe. "Your Honor," Ruth began, her voice calm as ever, "you were concerned that my standards were outdated. You're wrong. The standard never gets old. The standard is the standard. It doesn't care if you're a man or a woman. It doesn't care if you're 22 or 62. It only cares if you can meet it. You don't soften the standard, you rise to it. Fairly, for everyone." She turned her gaze to the judge, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the fire. Experience doesn't expire with youth. It's calcified by it. Gray hair doesn't mean you've gone soft. It means you've survived the things that broke other people. It means you've learned the difference between a crisis and an inconvenience. It means you know that the most important piece of equipment you will ever carry into a fight is the person standing next to you. As she spoke of the fight, another flash, this one sharper, more visceral. The world became a maelstrom of green-tinged chaos through her night vision goggles. Her pavehawk bucked and shuddered as machine gun tracers, like angry red hornets, zipped past the cockpit window. Below, on the winch, her pararescueman was trying to secure a gravely wounded soldier to the litter. The PJ's voice was strained over the intercom. "Ma'am, they're walking the rounds in on us. We gotta get out of here." Her own voice, younger but just as calm, replied in her memory, a steady anchor in the storm. "Hold fast, Jimmy. We're not leaving him. Hold fast." She held the helicopter in a perfect stationary hover, 10 feet above the rocky ground in the middle of a firefight, a machine weighing 10 tons, defying gravity and death by sheer force of will. Those tarnished silver wings on her lapel had been pinned to her flight suit that very night. She blinked, returning to the silent courtroom. She had made her point. The fallout was swift and decisive. Judge Alistair Carmody was formally censured by the State Judicial Review Board for his conduct. A new mandatory training program on veteran-specific cultural competency, with modules addressing both sexism and ageism, was implemented for all court staff. At Creech Air Force Base, Colonel Rostova announced the creation of the Whitman Pioneer Mentorship Program, a new initiative designed to connect young service members with retired veterans who had broken barriers. Airman Davis, with Colonel Whitman's unwavering support and a new understanding from the court, was given the help she needed and was on a path to recovery and honorable completion of her service. A few weeks later, Ruth was in the produce section of the base commissary, weighing a bag of apples. "Colonel Whitman?" She turned. It was Judge Carmody, dressed in a polo shirt and slacks, looking smaller and older without his black robes. "Your Honor," she said, her voice neutral. "Please, call me Alistair," he said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. I wanted to apologize. In person. What I did in that courtroom was inexcusable. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. Deeply wrong. There's no excuse." Ruth studied him for a moment. She could have been cold, dismissive. She had earned that right. Instead, she offered him a small measure of grace. "We all have our biases, Judge. The important thing is what we do after we're forced to see them." She paused, then added, "I once had a young flight engineer I thought was too cocky, too sure of himself. I almost had him reassigned. A week later, he was the one who jury-rigged a damaged fuel line with nothing but a strip of rubber and some zip ties and got us home. He taught me that you don't judge the book by its cover, but by how it holds up in the storm." The judge nodded, humbled. "Thank you, Colonel. Thank you." He walked away. A man carrying a new and heavy lesson. Ruth turned back to her apples, her mission for the day complete. A moment later, a young airman approached her, a woman with bright, eager eyes and a single stripe on her sleeve. "Colonel Whitman, ma'am, I'm in the new mentorship program. I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Ruth Whitman looked at the young woman, at the future of the Air Force she loved, and she smiled. a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "The honor is all mine, Airman. Now tell me, what's your story? If you believe the quiet heroes among us deserve to have their stories told, subscribe to She Chose Valor. Share this story to honor the women who served in silence, and hit the like button to ensure their legacies are never forgotten. Join us for more stories of courage, resilience, and valor.